greatest tragedy was that we saw it coming.
You know when you watch a movie and there's that sort of like low drone noise? It just increases in volume. And you just know that something's coming and it's going wrong. It was like that. It was a very slow burn.
This is the one that bushfire fighters have had nightmares about for years.
5 million square kilometres. That's the size of Europe.
Climate scientists are saying the bushfires in Australia are a warning of what may be to come around the world.
We're getting weather now that no human being has ever seen.
We knew that we would start feeling the impacts before anyone else. But the greatest tragedy of this black summer was that we saw it coming. The story doesn't make any sense unless you understand what Australia's actually like.
Coal industry, carbon emissions.
We're now the world's largest exporter of coal.
There has been a concerted effort to undermine the science of climate change.
We know what causes bushfire. Someone has to light it.
Their lies and their deception.
There is no credible energy plan that does not involve gas. Got to get the gas.
Our climate has changed forever.
That's the way we should tell the story. We could be a renewable energy superpower.
We are on the outskirts of the biggest catastrophe. Our government is doing nothing.
But what people don't really understand is this is the critical moment for humanity.
Please welcome to the stage the director and executive producer of Burning, Eva Orner, in conversation with Bloomberg Green's Aaron Rutkoff.
Thank you so much for being here with us and for sharing your film.
Thank you.
It was really remarkable to get to see it. I want to start by asking you how things have changed in the time period since you completed the movie. I mean, for one thing, you're getting to show it outside of a COP. I know at this COP, Australia, unlike in the movie, has a pavilion. We reported on the fact that Australia put out a net zero plan ahead of this COP without very much detail. Scott Morrison is still Prime Minister. What has changed after 1/5 of the forest land in Australia burned?
I mean, we knew that coming up to COP there were going to be some announcements, and I think he resisted committing to net zero 2050 until the last possible second. It was very, very recently and very reluctantly. But also it was done without any plan. It was just a blanket statement, and I think we can all agree, having seen a little history of some of his politics, he's very good at saying things and not following through, or saying things that don't make much sense. So basically we've committed, I actually live in America now, but I am Australian, and we've committed to net zero 2050, but without any solid plan or budget or legislation to get there. And the targets for 2030 have not changed, and they're woeful. And that's, I think we can all agree, are more important than the 2050 targets, because since the UN report came out recently, I think we've all realised we're in direr straits than we thought.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And the other sort of almost comical thing was that Scott Morrison said he wasn't going to come to COP for a long time. He blamed quarantine and COVID for a long time. And my belief is that he was shaded by the Queen publicly, and very soon after she did that, he announced that he was coming to COP. So, you know, it's pretty grim, and Australia's underperformed terribly at COP. We weren't a signatory to the methane agreement, to the coal agreement. You know, it's pretty slim.
Well, yeah. Well, I wanna.
Could you move your microphone up so people can hear you? Oh, I'm sorry. It's working though, right? Is that better? Yes. Okay, sorry about that.
Well, as just a quick summary, I'll say that I think one of the scientist character in your film described it as sleepwalking into a catastrophe, and that's the train. I thought it was my microphone. It feels like your sense after completing this film is that that's still the prevailing sensibility. Is that?
Yeah. Do I need it or? Yeah, please. Oh, really? Okay. Is that better? No. Yes. Hello. Okay.
So still sleepwalking into a catastrophe, I guess, is the recap.
Yeah, with a little more of a PR spin, I would say, by announcing something like net zero 2050, but having no solid plans to materialise that.
Well, so I want to ask you more questions about the making of the film, but before I do that, I want to say I think we've handed out QR codes for people to scan, and if you don't have a QR code, you can use your phone and go to begreen.live/ask. And that's the way you can put questions in that'll appear on this screen here, and I can ask them to Eva about the movie or about anything else that you want to ask. So let's talk about the making of the film. So when in the Black Summer of the Australian wildfires did you decide that you were going to make a documentary about it?
So I live in LA, and I was watching it unfold from a distance, and I think it was August 2019, I saw the first thing on probably CNN or something saying the fires had started in Australia. And as Greg Mullins says in the film, fires happen in Australia. We're a fire-prone country. But this was something different. And I remember at the time being like, oh, it's August. It's not even spring. It's actually winter when the fires were starting, which is unprecedented and incredibly early. It was on my radar. And in October, I saw, again from LA, Sydney was completely covered in smoke, which I'd never seen in my lifetime. And by chance, I was going home, as I do most summers in Australia, to visit family. So I arrived back in December, and I was there December, January. So I was there through the brunt of it. And it was just unbelievable. I mean, it felt like the whole country was burning. Everyone was impacted. A lot of friends and family lost homes. And just our public radio, ABC, we were driving around a lot. And we listen to it all the time when we drive, and it was like an emergency radio station. It was just constantly about evacuations and fires. So that was shocking. But I think the thing that really threw me over the edge was on December 27 in Melbourne, my hometown, where I lived for 34 years. it was 47 degrees Celsius. And I lived there for 34 years and it never got above 44 degrees, which was generally 1 week in February in late summer. So this was early summer. And, you know, anecdotally, that's a 3-degree temperature increase in my lifetime. And that's not the science, it's 1.5 degrees that we've increased temperature. But in what is ground zero for climate change, the temperature has actually increased 3 degrees in my hometown. And everyone was kind of walking around in that Australian kind of laconic, relaxed way, going, yeah, it's really hot. And I was kind of like, guys, it's like Baghdad. What is happening here? So that was one of the moments that really affected me. And then, you know, being in Sydney in January and the whole city was in smoke again. So I think by the time, you know, we got on a plane to go home to LA, I was kind of like, I think there's a film here. Right. But I always thought from the beginning, it shouldn't just be stories about fires and victims. It needed to be about climate change and it needed to be all-encompassing.
Now, there was a review of your film in The Guardian, and I think when we spoke previously, you said that there have been some other films about the fires that actually didn't mention climate change very much. Is that right?
Yeah, and I'm not one at all to criticise. I think a lot of the fire films are very strong and they are very much about victims, but they do tend to, you know, maybe in the third act someone kind of goes, climate change, and I kind of get to the end of those films and I was really frustrated because I don't think you can tell the story of fire or anything that's a result of climate change without talking about the cause and what we need to do. And I know why people stay away from it because it's a challenging subject. And, you know, my editors would tell you if they were here that they want to kill me when I came back with all this footage and said, yeah, it's like an essayistic film about the last 30 years. And it's really hard to put together and make compelling. But I just thought you couldn't just tell a story about the fires. It's irresponsible.
Well, I want to talk about some of that imagery because, you know, the team that I work with, climate journalists and editors, you know, we see a lot of the, you know, very difficult images surrounding climate impacts. The ones in your film are remarkable and, you know, really hard to erase from your mind after you see them. They really stay with you. Are those, I mean, we've all seen the kind of orange sun blocked out by smoke. We've all seen very devastating pictures of wildfires, but some of the footage that you found of animals experiencing the fire and the way that people are, you know, trying to flee from the fire on the ground, were those familiar images to Australians in the aftermath of the fire, or were these kind of previously unseen looks at what it's like?
It's a combination. And again, a film like this is really heavily archive-based because it's told in the past and I wasn't at the event. So I think probably 70% of the film is actually archived, despite we shot a lot, obviously. Some of it has been seen before, some of it hasn't. You know, we have like an amazing team. I have an amazing archive producer who, you know, hunts things down. But also everyone that you meet, you know, along the journey of making the film, you say, do you have footage? Do you know anyone who took footage? You know, do you have anything on your phone? And so it's this endless scouring for the holy grail of footage. But it's funny because some of the footage has been seen before but not contextualised like this.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing what you can do to make footage seem different, the way it's edited and also where it comes in a story and also music. But we did try not to be, I mean, I know it's horrifying, but we actually pulled back. You know, I think there was actually a bit of editorial pressure to sort of put more animals in, and, you know, I was like, you just need to see this section, that is enough. You can't, you know, completely push it down people's throats. You have to be, you know, somewhat subtle about it. But there's nothing subtle about seeing, you know, a koala crying, which is probably, you know, the most horrific image in the film. And that koala did not make it. Lewis, the koala.
Well, I mean, it gives you the perspective like you're in the fire, which I'm grateful for because I hope to never have to experience it, but I do feel like I got to borrow from the people's experience in the film. And one of the questions asked by the audience is about the communities who survived the fire that you spoke to and we see Scott Morrison interacting with afterwards. Did they build back differently? Have people just remained in those communities that you focused on?
That's a good question. I think some people have moved. A lot of people stay. You know, we did interview someone but it didn't. You know, there's always amazing footage that ends up on the cutting room floor. And one of the people we talked to was someone who's building new housing that's fire-resistant housing. Mm-hmm. And actually in Cobargo, they were building a number of houses like that, and they're actually really affordable, really cool, and fire-resistant. And that's the future. But you know, there's not like a lot of government subsidies going into that. Obviously, there's not a lot of thought. It's just it's kind of one guy doing it on his own. And it's the same with hemp housing, which is something I didn't know about, which is becoming a thing as well, because hemp's fire resistant as well. So you would think all new construction in Australia, particularly in the country, would have these new, building codes and standards. And there's definitely a lot of talk, but I don't know really that much has happened.
Another audience question that I also had wanted to ask you myself is by somebody who's from British Columbia, which is highly prone to fires. You happen to live in 2 fire zones with your Australian origins and living in LA now. Have you found that there's a different culture or awareness around wildfire risk in the different communities that you live in? What's sort of similar or different about the California versus Australia wildfire approach?
It's sort of, California is very strange. I mean, Australia is a country of drought. We grew up with drought. We grew up with water restrictions. When you have water restrictions, if you break them, you get fined. And if you see your neighbour breaking them, you call someone. Like, it's really, it's serious. And in LA, I've already lived through massive droughts, and everyone's gardens look fantastic, and nobody cares, and the water restrictions are sort of irrelevant. So it's a very different way of dealing with things like water and climate. I don't know. I feel like in California, I don't feel like very much has changed. I feel like we're all buying, air purifiers for our house to use in summer because it's inevitably going to be smoky. I mean, I know about a handful of people who lost their houses in the last couple of years, but I don't see a lot of, I don't know, it feels different to me. I'm sure if you talk to firefighters there, though, they would have a lot to say because they seem to be working more and more. And one of the really awful stories that Greg Mullins, who's the wonderful ex-fire commissioner in the film, told me, he used to take teams over to California and vice versa a lot because our seasons are opposite because of the hemispheres. And he said they can't do that anymore because the fire seasons have extended so much in Australia and California that they overlap. You can't do that anymore. And to me, that was one of the more shocking stories that I heard.
Now, Greg Mullins is a very memorable character from your film. Another question from the audience is about the youth activist Daisy. I found one of the things she says in the film a couple times about how condescending she finds people telling her that she's the hope or she gives people hope. A question from the audience is about her concern about having children and not being able to safeguard their future. I guess, what do you make of that kind of view from the very compelling youth activist who kind of is like one of the central characters in your film?
Yeah, I fell in love with Daisy before I met her, and I always refer to her as Australia's Greta Thunberg. And she's uniquely Australian, and she's funny and joyful, and she's actually studying at university now, and she'll probably end up doing something pretty amazing. And then she and Greg and a few other people were just at the Australian premiere on Friday night in Sydney, which was great, and Greg introduced the film. I mean, I don't have children, so it's really interesting that I make these kind of films, because what have I got? Another, 20 or 30 years left. So why am I caring so much about what happens in the future? And what always astonishes me is that politicians all have children and grandchildren and don't seem to, give a shit. Sorry, I swear I'm Australian. But no, I completely think Daisy's really smart speaking like that. But how heartbreaking is it seeing at the time she was 17, a 17-year-old saying, I'm not sure if I should have children. That's what she's thinking about at this point because of what we've done. And I completely understand and agree with her point about, please don't say you give me hope. Because that generation is going to have to solve this ultimately. Look, it looks like we're not going to do a very good job, and they're going to have to live through it, as are their children. So I think she's right. And when she says, I'm not angry, I always in my head say, you should be angry, I'm angry. So I think she's quite extraordinary. But also think about the trauma that a 16-year-old has, who's now 19 at college, and she spent her last couple of years at school doing what she did, instead of, as she said, just having like an existential crisis or, worrying about, grades and boys or girls or whatever. So it's a lot of pressure to put on the kids, and I find that pretty heartbreaking.
Being here at COP, I keep thinking about the idea of going to buy blue jeans to go to the prior COP while the wildfire smoke, that's like not a teen experience that one should have. There's a sort of off-screen character in the film with all the sky clips, and I wanted to ask you about the Murdoch media. There's been a move by the Murdoch media to get into climate journalism. Is that something that you've seen changing in terms of the way that that part of Australian media is reporting on climate change?
I mean, clearly, I'm sure none of us are a fan of Sky, which is Murdoch, which is the biggest source of news in Australia. And I live in America, so, I've watched the damage that Fox has wreaked all over the country and the world. I mean, when was it? A couple of months ago, the Murdoch press came out with this really cynical announcement saying they were reverting their stance on climate change and they were going to start admitting to climate change. And what kind of killed me was that everyone reported it. It was in the New York Times. It was all over, it was all over the press globally. And then, to my knowledge, they did nothing. So it was just, smokes and mirrors. And also, if you're going to do 180 on the opinions and the news you've been putting out that's false for the last however long, then you need a rationale and you need an apology and you need an explanation, and nobody asked them for that. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So you can just come out one day and say, oh, today we're going to be good, and everyone will believe you. And then they've done nothing to follow up with that. I mean, I think they should be held so responsible for so much that's happened. And during the fires, they were putting out news that was, going out globally that the fires were caused by arsonists. And when they retracted it, it didn't matter because we all know retractions are later and, small print. And the damage was done. You still hear people say there were arsonists in Australia, which is just completely fact-free.
Now, at the end of the film, Greg Mullins, I think the firefighter talks about, leaving deniers behind. You're showing this film's going to be on Amazon, so it's going to be available to a very wide audience, but you're showing this film here at COP, where presumably everyone in this room is taking the issue very seriously. Is your expectation that this is a film that people who are in doubt or skeptical will see and it will change their mind, or do you feel like that's a difficult ask for a film to do?
Yeah, I do a lot of political films, and often people say, what do you want to achieve with this film? And, you're preaching to the converted. And I agree that a lot of people that are going to watch this are going to be liberal on this subject. But I always say, there's like 40% here and 40% here, and there's 20% in the middle. And you get those 20% in the middle, you're winning. So that's kind of, I guess, who my dream is to see this film, people who are confused or not sure or don't know enough about it. So that's kind of one thing. And I think the other thing that I really would like audiences to come away with is being so concerned that finally they put climate change as the number one reason when they vote, as opposed to the economy or whatever else drives them. Because Australia has an election coming up probably in the next 6 months. And, I have a horrible sinking feeling that Scott Morrison will get in again. And, you make your bed, you lie in it, but there's got to be a point where enough people care and are so concerned that they vote better.
Now, I know this is your first climate film, but a lot of your films still deal with very heavy subjects. I'm wondering if there were any climate documentaries or just films in general that you sought inspiration from when you were making this documentary.
That's a good question. I guess anything that's heavily archive-based. You start when you're making a heavy archive film, you just watch archive films a lot. So things that I love that are completely off topic are, Senna and Amy, which were 100% archive. And I mean, I think, I have this funny anecdote from Al Gore's film An Inconvenient Truth all those years ago when it came out, and I went back and watched that again. But people always say, how do you get people to watch films about climate change? And my answer, or about refugees, or about any tough subject, which I tend to deal with, and I always say, well, you make a good film that's a compelling story, and then people will see it. And I remember really well the year that An Inconvenient Truth came out, we missed it at Sundance, and I was working with Alex Gibney in New York. And shortly after Sundance, he said, do you want to come and see that Al Gore slideshow movie that was, a huge hit at Sundance? And I went, yeah, it sounds terrible. He wants to see an Al Gore movie, about a slideshow. I said, if it's bad, I'll take a nap. And we went to see it, and it was fantastic, and it was amazing. And I guess that was the last time I probably said something that terrible and facetious about a film. But, you can make anything compelling. It's all in the storytelling. You can make any story riveting. And so I think, people always used to say, oh, you can't make a TV show about advertising, and then someone made Mad Men, excuse me. But that was, that was for years. It was that kind of approach, and I just feel like we have to get past this hesitation of how do you make a film about climate change compelling when it's the most compelling issue on the planet.
Well, I think one of the things that you did so well is, in addition to the footage that I think everyone who watched the movie won't forget, the people who you bring in to help tell the story, they have agency. They're doing something that you didn't just seek out people who had obviously we talked to people that have hardships. How did you find the characters in the movie? You talked about Daisy, but how did you go about rounding up the human voices that you used?
Usually when you start a documentary, it's like, I love making documentaries because every film is like doing a course at university, and you sort of start with nothing, and you find a few people and you start talking, and they refer to more people and more people. So it's really it's my favourite part of filmmaking, which I call discovery, is the first few months, because by the end of it, you've been in it for a long time. So it was during COVID, actually, and it was sort of the really bad part, the beginning of COVID, when we all didn't really leave the house or know what was happening. And, I was in LA, and I just spent a ton of time on Zoom. And most of the people in the film I didn't meet until the day we filmed them because of COVID restrictions. By the time I got to Australia, did hotel quarantine for 2 weeks. There was very limited travel. Everyone had to do COVID tests before we got to see them, even in all these small towns. It was kind of tricky convincing some of them to do COVID tests because there was no COVID there. But it was really, I was on Zoom just non-stop for months talking to people. And you often find people who are great, but then you don't put them in the film, or you film them and they don't make it. So to me, it's always about every person has to have a reason to be in it, and they have to progress the story. And so one of the things I was very wary of was having, sort of victim after victim after victim. Not that their stories aren't incredibly valuable and we have so much empathy for them, but it can't be repetitious. You have to keep progressing. So, there's only really one person, Jan, in Malakuta, who talks about losing her house, but she does it in a way that I don't think we've seen before, because so many people, Australians are laconic and sort of, proud and quiet about tragedy. And when she says, I've lost all of my parents and my grandparents' things, I've lost a part of my life, she just says it in this very calm manner, and I think that's sort of heartbreaking. But, every person was there for a very specific reason.
One question from the audience is how they can help get people to see your movie. Is there any advice you'd have on that?
I guess post, tell everyone about it, social media, just be annoying.
Well, one thing that I'm really grateful for is that we'll get to continue working together on Bloomberg Green Docs. And I guess one question I wanted to leave you with is, now that you've made a fantastic climate film, what are you hoping to see in terms of the next generation of climate filmmaking, of climate documentaries?
I'm super excited. I love being on juries. It's always really fun watching new films. And because this is short docs, I feel like there might be a lot of young filmmakers. Mm-hmm. I think with short docs, you can really hone in on a subject. So I'm guessing there'll be some things that I've never heard of or know of. And I'm assuming it's global, right?
It is.
So I'm expecting lots of stories that we've never heard of that will be really great. And I'm also expecting probably, I'm thinking it's going to be young filmmakers for some reason that submit films, but I feel like a lot of them might be optimistic, which would be a nice change.
It would be.
But I'm sure there'll be some horror stories too.
Well, on the balance between optimism and horror stories, I think we'll leave it there. I'm so grateful that you are with us today. I want to just make a few last announcements before we wrap this up. The first is to remember that Burning is going to be on Amazon Prime by the end of this month. Is that right?
Yeah, November 26th globally.
We are going to be, we already spoke about the Bloomberg Green Docs, but there's going to be a website with more information about how to submit 10-minute films. It's bloomberg.com/greendocs. You can also sign up for the Green Daily newsletter while you're there and follow the rest of my team's reporting from COP26 and beyond. And I wanted to just remind everybody that we're going to be back in the same space tomorrow for a day-long Bloomberg Green Summit event, including a one-on-one interview with U.S. Climate Envoy John Kerry and our editor-in-chief, and a great list of scientists and executives and climate leaders who are all going to be here throughout the day. I hope you'll come back here tomorrow, and I'll see you all at the summit. And thank you for being here tonight for Burning. Good job.